You know, it's hard to miss all the headlines lately, right? Disease outbreaks. Feels like we're living in some kind of like real life plague movie, doesn't it?
I get that. It can feel overwhelming for sure.
So instead of panicking, what if we do what we do best here? Deep dive. Get informed.
Love that plan. Knowledge is power, especially with this kind of thing.
Right. So today we're going to tackle 5 diseases. They're like the comeback kids of the disease world. Tuberculosis, pandemic influenza, then there's antibiotic-resistant bacteria, polio, and get this.
Oh, thinking of where you're going with this.
Plague, yeah. The Black Death. Apparently not just a history lesson anymore.
Quite a lineup. And it really shows how connected our world is, doesn't it? These things aren't isolated threats. It's globalization, climate change, healthcare access, and even our own choices all mixed in.
That's what's so fascinating about these deep dives, you know? It's like connecting the dots between stuff you wouldn't think was related. Like, who knew a medieval plague could be linked to climate change?
It's all about the bigger picture. But let's start with maybe something a bit more familiar. TB. I bet most folks think of it as like a disease of the past, historical novel stuff.
Totally. I remember reading about it in, like, books about Victorian England and things, people coughing delicately into handkerchiefs. It all seemed very romantic, almost.
Well, the reality of TB, far from romantic. And it's true, it's been around for ages. We've even found evidence of it in Egyptian mummies. Can you believe it?
Wow, really? That long?
But here's the thing, it's not just history. We're talking 10 million people getting sick with TB each year.
10 million. Wow. I had no idea it was still such a widespread problem.
It is, and increasingly difficult to treat, too. Drug-resistant TB, that's the real worry. Strains that don't respond to the usual medications, major problem.
This all sounds honestly pretty alarming. I have to admit, I always thought of TB as a disease of the past, you know, like gone. How wrong was I?
You're not alone in thinking that. A lot of people assume it was eradicated, but that's so far from the truth. And the rise of these drug-resistant strains, well, there are a few factors. Inconsistent treatment, limited health care in certain parts of the world.
So it's not just the bacteria itself, it's like the social and economic conditions that kind of help it thrive.
You got it. And you throw in global travel, and suddenly a disease that seems contained somewhere can become everyone's problem.
That makes a lot of sense. So what can we do? Like, what can regular people do about this?
Well, first off, awareness is key.
Yeah.
Know how common TB is in your area.
Yeah.
Take precautions if you're traveling to places where it's more prevalent. Good starting point.
So checking travel advisories, packing hand sanitizer, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And, on a bigger scale, supporting efforts that improve healthcare access worldwide. Make sure TB patients get consistent treatment. Crucial stuff. But let's shift gears a bit. Another disease, and this one I think has a much more modern, almost, apocalyptic feel. Pandemic influenza.
Okay, yeah, now you're talking about something that captures the imagination and fuels a lot of nightmares, too. I mean, 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, 500 million infected, 50 million dead. It's mind-blowing.
It is. Really highlights how devastating a new pandemic flu strain could be.
Yeah.
And what makes influenza so tricky? It's always changing, mutates, constantly. 2 main ways. Antigenic drift and antigenic shift.
Whoa, hold on a second. Back up. Antigenic what now?
Okay, think of it like this. Antigenic drift. It's like your phone getting a software update. Happens a lot, but doesn't change how your phone fundamentally works. Antigenic shift.
Yeah.
That's like getting a brand new phone, whole different operating system, new features, the whole thing.
Okay, I'm with you now. So it's like the flu virus is tweaking its code all the time, and sometimes it comes up with a whole new version we're just not ready for.
Exactly. And the scary part is these new strains, so different we have little to no immunity. That's what makes them so dangerous.
So are we talking full-blown zombie apocalypse here?
Not quite. But you're not far off in terms of, like, the potential impact. And certain things, like crowded livestock farms where a virus can spread and mutate more easily, global travel, even climate change, all these things can increase the risk of a new pandemic popping up.
It's like a perfect storm brewing, almost.
In some ways,
Yeah.
It is. But good news, we're not powerless. We've got tools to mitigate the risks.
Okay, so what can we do? I'm ready to be empowered.
The annual flu shot.
Mm-hmm.
Great place to start. Even if it's not a perfect match for whatever strain is going around, it can lessen how bad you get it.
Right, so it's like wearing a bulletproof vest, right? Might not stop all the bullets, but could save your life. What else?
Good hygiene, the basics. Washing your hands a lot, covering coughs, sneezes, helps prevent all those respiratory viruses from spreading, flu included.
Yeah, yeah, the basics, they make a difference though, right?
They do. And having a few supplies ready, masks, hand sanitizer, maybe some non-perishable food if you need to stay home for a while, just helps you feel more prepared, more in control.
This all makes sense. But it's a little overwhelming, I gotta admit, to think about it all. Where do we even start?
A good first step, honestly. A family emergency communication plan. Who are you going to call if you get separated? Where are you going to meet up? Important things to talk about ahead of time.
That's a good point. It's about communication and planning, a lot of this, isn't it? But let's switch to another threat that feels super real right now. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria. I mean, antibiotics, they've been like a miracle of modern medicine, but now it feels like they're failing.
It's a huge concern. We've relied on them for so long, we kind of took them for granted, didn't we? But now, facing this post-antibiotic era thing, even minor infections could become deadly.
That sounds straight out of a dystopian novel, honestly. Are we really headed for a world where, like, a simple cut could kill you? Seriously.
It's not an exaggeration to say the stakes are that high.
Yeah.
We're already seeing the impact. MRSA, CRE, just a couple examples of bacteria that are resistant to a bunch of antibiotics.
And the CDC, they estimate that in the U.S. alone, these resistant bacteria cause over 2.8 million infections and 35,000 deaths each year. That's terrifying.
It is. Underscores how urgent this is.
But we're not totally powerless against this, right? There's got to be something we can do.
Absolutely not. We all have a role to play. Starts with understanding how our choices impact this problem.
Okay, preach. What can we do?
Don't pressure your doctor for antibiotics if it's a viral thing, like a cold or the flu. Antibiotics only work on bacteria, not viruses.
Right, right. I think that's something a lot of people don't quite get. They think antibiotics are like a cure-all.
And equally important, if you are prescribed antibiotics, take the whole course, even if you start feeling better before you finish all the pills.
Oh, yeah. Guilty of that myself in the past. I'd be like, hey, I feel better, don't need these anymore.
It's a super common mistake. But stopping early allows the bacteria that survived to multiply and maybe develop resistance. Like, imagine weeding a garden. Got to get all the weeds, not just the obvious ones, right?
That's a great way to put it. I'll remember that. So personal responsibility is a big deal here.
Huge. Our choices, like using antibiotics, right, have a ripple effect on everyone's health.
Yeah.
But let's move on to another comeback kid. And this one's kind of heartbreaking because we were so close to wiping it out. Polio.
The comeback kid nobody wanted to see again. And speaking of global travel, that's a big part of polio coming back, right? Spreads so easily across borders.
For sure. And what's more concerning is we're seeing vaccination rates drop, even in developed countries.
So it's not just a problem over there. This is happening right here in our own communities.
Yep. And it's mostly due to vaccine hesitancy.
That's so frustrating. I mean, we have this amazing tool, a vaccine that can prevent this horrible disease, and people are choosing not to use it.
It's complicated, but understanding the science behind vaccines is super important. They're crucial for protecting everyone. And we're seeing outbreaks now from something called vaccine-derived poliovirus.
Vaccine-derived? What does that even mean?
It's a bit tricky, but basically, in places with poor sanitation, the weakened virus in the oral polio vaccine can spread, and in very rare cases, mutate into something that can cause paralysis.
Wow. So even vaccination has its, nuances. It's not as simple as we sometimes think.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to keep vaccination rates high everywhere if we want to truly get rid of polio.
It feels like fighting an uphill battle sometimes, doesn't it? But we can't give up. What can we do? What can listeners do to help?
Make sure everyone in your family is up to date on their polio vaccines. That's a big one. And think about supporting those global organizations working to wipe out polio worldwide.
Great suggestions. But let's move on to our final contender in this parade of disease comebacks, the plague. Honestly, I'm still wrapping my head around this one. I thought the Black Death was just medieval history, period.
True, it ravaged Europe back in the 14th century, wiped out a third of the population, just devastating. But that bacteria that causes it, Yersinia pestis, it's still around, mostly in rodents all over the world.
Hold on, so you're saying bubonic plague, the Black Death plague, is still out there? I thought we left that in the history books.
Sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? But it's real. Now, modern antibiotics can treat it if it's caught early, but it's still a threat.
But with modern medicine, how is that even possible? Antibiotics cure the plague, don't they?
They do, if you get treatment fast. But the thing is, the plague often looks like the flu at first.
Yep.
So people might not get diagnosed and treated quickly enough.
So it's a race against time.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And the type we're really worried about, pneumonic plague.
Mnemonic plague. Okay, that sounds even worse than bubonic.
It is super dangerous. Affects the lungs, can spread through the air like the flu or a cold.
Okay, now I'm officially freaked out. What can we do? How do we protect ourselves from this?
Knowledge, that's our best weapon, as always. Knowing the symptoms, sudden fever, headache, chills, weakness, swollen lymph nodes, all that.
So if you get any of those, especially after being somewhere plague is known to be, get to a doctor ASAP.
Exactly. Early diagnosis and treatment, super important.
This is a lot to take in. It's like a crash course and everything's scary.
I know, it can feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
But remember, we're not trying to scare you. We're trying to empower you. Understanding the threats is the first step to getting ready for them.
You're right. Better to be prepared than paralyzed by fear. But where do we even begin?
Well, that's what we'll dig into in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll get into the practical steps for creating a solid preparedness plan.
Okay, now you're talking. Knowledge is power, but actionable steps. That's what really matters.
Absolutely. We'll cover all that in detail when we get back. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some, well, pretty serious stuff. But remember, the goal isn't to scare you. It's to, give you the tools to be prepared.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right?
It totally is. And one of the most powerful things you can do, create a preparedness plan.
Okay, I'm all ears. What makes a good plan? What are the, essential ingredients?
Well, first step is pretty basic, actually. Making sure you have enough emergency supplies.
Okay, that seems simple enough. What kind of supplies are we talking about, specifically?
Well, think about it. A 30-day supply of any prescription meds. For you, for your family, anyone who depends on them. Imagine needing your meds during an outbreak and not being able to get them.
Oh, good point. It's easy to forget about the stuff we rely on every day.
Exactly. And of course, a well-stocked first aid kit, that's a must. But it's not just about having the stuff, it's knowing how to use it, right?
So maybe brush up on first aid skills, take a CPR class, something like that.
Exactly. Those could be invaluable in a real emergency. And don't forget about personal protective equipment too. Masks, gloves, all that.
Right, especially if it's something contagious. What about food and water? How much should people have on hand?
Aim for at least 2 weeks worth of food that'll keep, non-perishable. And water too, of course. Just in case there are disruptions to, supply chains or you can't leave home for a while.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the stuff covered, but what about the things you can't buy? How do you actually prepare for this kind of thing?
That's where knowledge and skills come in. Being able to spot those early warning signs, knowing when to get help, understanding how to prevent infection, even the basics.
So becoming more medically literate in general?
Exactly. Even things like proper hand washing, how to cough or sneeze without spreading germs.
Yeah.
That stuff makes a huge difference.
Right. Things we've all heard a million times, but they're important.
Totally fundamental, especially for preventing contagious diseases. The stuff we've been using for this deep dive. They also suggest learning about, home-based medical care for things that aren't, full-blown emergencies.
Interesting. You mean being able to take care of yourself at home without needing a doctor for every little thing?
Exactly. There's some great stuff out there that teaches you how to handle minor cuts, burns, common illnesses, things you might not need to go to the hospital for, especially if it's hard to get to a doctor during an outbreak.
Makes a lot of sense. Be as self-sufficient as possible, right?
You got it. But preparedness isn't just about you on your own. It's about community, too.
Okay, so how does community fit into this whole thing?
Starts with knowing your neighbors, especially those who might need a hand in an emergency. Older folks, people with disabilities, families with little kids, they might need extra help.
Right, checking in on your neighbors, making sure everyone's okay. Simple, but important.
It can make a world of difference, truly. And know your local emergency resources, too. Where are the shelters? Who do you call for help? First responders, all that. Figure it out ahead of time.
I gotta admit, I've never really thought about that. I guess I just assume someone else will take care of it.
Better to be prepared. And those community emergency preparedness programs, don't underestimate those. Lots of communities offer training, workshops, all sorts of stuff. Learn how to use a fire extinguisher, do basic first aid, could come in handy.
So getting involved in those programs can actually be, fun and useful.
You got it. Meet people, learn new skills, get more connected with your community. And speaking of connection, let's talk about communication readiness.
Communication. What does that have to do with disease preparedness?
more than you might think. During a big outbreak, or any kind of emergency really, those communication networks can get messed up.
So what if you can't get your family on your cell phone?
Exactly. That's why backups are important. Do you have a landline? What about those old school methods, like writing notes, signal flares? Might sound crazy, but you never know.
I'm starting to feel like a survivalist over here.
It's about thinking ahead, being ready for anything. Set up family meeting points, communication plans. Where will you meet if you get separated? Who will you call? Talk it through with your family before anything happens.
I'm sensing a theme here. Communication and planning, key ingredients.
For sure. And staying informed, that goes without saying, right? Get your info from reliable sources. CDC, World Health Organization, not just like random stuff on social media.
Right, right. We all need to be careful about misinformation, especially when things are chaotic. But I'm curious, what about the government? What's their role in all this? Like, how can they help prepare for and respond to outbreaks?
That's a great question. Deserves a whole deep dive on its own, honestly. But for now, I'll give you a few key points.
Okay, lay on me.
First off, government's got to invest in public health infrastructure. That means like systems to track outbreaks, labs to diagnose infections, stockpiles of medical supplies, that kind of thing.
So basically, making sure they have the resources to, like, spot and respond to outbreaks quickly and effectively.
Exactly. And they also set public health policies,
Yeah.
vaccination requirements, quarantines, travel restrictions, all that.
Yeah, those are important tools to stop diseases from spreading, for sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And they can educate the public, too, about the risks, about ways to protect themselves. Public service announcements, educational materials, that sort of thing.
So raising awareness and giving people the info they need to make good choices.
You got it. And finally, they got to work with other countries, with international organizations, to address global health threats. Because like we said before, diseases don't stop at borders.
True, true. We're all in this together, right?
We are. Global cooperation, it's essential. But before we move on, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier. The idea of a post-antibiotic world.
Ugh, yeah. That one really sticks with me. It's a scary thought. A world where even a little cut could kill you. Are we really headed there?
It's a real concern, and we need to be talking about it more. The way we've overused and misused antibiotics. It's created these superbugs that are resistant to a lot of drugs.
So is there any hope? What can we do to change things?
There's always hope. But it's going to take a multi-pronged approach. We need to educate people about how to use antibiotics responsibly. Don't demand them when you've got a virus.
Right, right. We talked about that earlier. Antibiotics only work on bacteria, not viruses.
Exactly. And if you are prescribed them, take the whole course, even if you feel better before you're done.
When we're cutting corners on those prescriptions. Got it. What else can we do?
We need new antibiotics. The pipeline for new drugs is drying up. We desperately need new weapons to fight these superbugs.
So it's personal responsibility, public education, and scientific innovation all rolled into one. What about, like, the bigger picture? Are there systemic changes that could help?
Absolutely. One big problem is how much antibiotics are used in agriculture. Farmers often give them to livestock to make them grow faster, prevent disease. But that can lead to resistant bacteria that can spread to humans.
So what we eat can actually contribute to this problem.
It can, yeah. And there are concerns about how antibiotics are used in healthcare settings, too. Sometimes doctors prescribe them when they're not really necessary, maybe because patients pressure them or just to be extra careful.
Wow, it's complicated. So many things connected. Feels like a lot to deal with.
It is. But the good news is there are people working on this from every angle. Scientists, researchers, policymakers, healthcare professionals. And we can all do our part by making informed choices, educating ourselves, and pushing for policies that promote responsible use of antibiotics.
It's good to know we can make a difference, even with something this big and scary. But I think we need to end this part on a more positive note. What are some of the cool things that have been done in fighting infectious diseases? The successes.
I'm glad you asked. It's easy to get caught up in the bad stuff, but we've made a lot of progress. Vaccines, for instance. Game changer. Saved so many lives, wiped out diseases that used to be huge killers.
Like smallpox, right? That's a big win.
Totally. And we're close to getting rid of polio, too. Right. And we've also got much better treatments for things like HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, antiretroviral therapy. It's turned HIV from a death sentence into something people can live with.
That's amazing. So yeah, there are challenges, but there's also hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Human ingenuity, scientific progress, those are our best weapons.
Speaking of human ingenuity, I'm curious, how does that tie into preparedness? What's the role of innovation in getting ready for the next big outbreak?
That is a great question, and it's something that really gets me excited. We're seeing amazing breakthroughs: diagnostics, vaccine development, even artificial intelligence.
Whoa, AI, how does that fit in?
AI can help develop early warning systems, ones that can catch outbreaks sooner. They can analyze tons of data to find risk factors, even help design new drugs and vaccines. It's really revolutionary stuff.
That's mind-blowing. So technology is like a major player in preparing for the future.
It's essential, absolutely. But it's not just about fancy high-tech either. Sometimes the simplest things have the biggest impact.
Can you give me an example? Like, what do you mean?
Okay, think about hand washing. Simple, right? One of the best ways to stop infection from spreading. But in a lot of places, clean water and soap, they're hard to come by.
Right, right. So how do we solve that?
That's where the cleverness comes in. There are portable hand washing stations now, ones that don't need running water, and there are even soaps that kill germs without water, antimicrobial soaps.
Wow, that's really cool. So it's about finding solutions that fit the problem no matter what.
Exactly. And those solutions can come from anywhere. We need to encourage creativity at all levels, from community groups to global research teams.
I love that. Everyone can be part of the solution. But how does this all relate to, like, the individual person? What can we do to support this kind of innovation?
Another great question. One of the biggest things. Support the organizations working on these solutions. Donate to a research foundation or just spread the word about what they're doing. Every bit helps.
Good point. And it goes back to that idea of personal responsibility, something we've been talking about a lot today.
It all ties together. We all have a part to play in, shaping the future of healthcare and how prepared we are for whatever comes next.
Okay, we're almost out of time for this part, but before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a question, something to think about from the stuff we've been reading.
Hit me with it.
Here it is. Even the most advanced medical systems can quickly become overwhelmed during disease outbreaks. This reality underscores the importance of personal preparedness.
Whoa, that's powerful. It really means we can't just assume the system will take care of us. We need to take care of ourselves too.
Exactly. Be proactive, be prepared. And that's not just about supplies. It's about taking care of ourselves, staying informed, being, good citizens.
Well said.
Okay, folks, that's it for part 2 of our deep dive. We'll be right back with our final thoughts, our takeaways. Don't go anywhere. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. Man, we've covered a lot, haven't we? Ancient plagues, superbugs, even all that incredible progress in fighting diseases. Hopefully you're feeling, more informed and ready than freaked out.
That's the goal. Informed, not scared. Knowledge is power, like we keep saying.
Absolutely. And we've given you a ton of practical stuff, right? Advice you can actually use to make your own preparedness plan.
And that point from the source material, it's worth repeating, I think. The one about even the most advanced medical systems, it said.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Even the most advanced medical systems can quickly become overwhelmed during disease outbreaks. Heavy stuff.
It really hit home for me. We can't just assume it'll all be fine, someone else will handle it. We got to be ready ourselves.
Totally. Proactive and prepared. And that means more than just having stuff, It's taking care of ourselves, staying in the know, being good citizens.
You got it. And before we wrap this whole thing up, I want to leave you with one last thought. It goes back to that idea of personal responsibility, something we've been talking about a lot.
Okay, I'm ready. What's the takeaway?
Think of it like this. Preparedness. It's not just about stockpiling supplies or learning first aid, right? It's also about the choices we make every day. Choices that make us healthier overall.
You mean like eating right, getting enough sleep, exercising, all that?
Exactly, all that basic stuff. It helps your immune system, makes you more resilient, like laying a good foundation for your health.
Makes sense. We usually think about preventing disease with vaccines and medicine, but our daily habits matter too.
Big time. It's about owning your health, making choices that are good for you, physically and mentally.
And it's not a one-and-done thing either. It's got to be ongoing.
Right. Preparedness is a journey, not a destination. You got to stay informed, be flexible, keep checking your plans and what you need. Things change fast, new threats pop up all the time.
So vigilance and being proactive.
You got it. And remember those resources we mentioned, like that home doctor guide. Super helpful for learning how to take care of things yourself at home, staying up to date on health info.
Speaking of experts, it's been awesome having you here today. I've learned a ton.
Happy to be here. Always love sharing what I know, and hopefully it helps people feel more in control of their health.
I think our listeners are feeling that way right now. They've gotten so much from this deep dive.
That's the whole point. Knowledge is the best defense we've got. So take what you learned today, keep learning, and make a plan that works for you, for your family.
And don't forget to share this episode. Tell your friends, your family. The more people who know this stuff, the better prepared we all are as a community.
Couldn't say it better myself. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, stay healthy.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating look at the world around us.